Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, October 18th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, director of the Revolving Door Project at the CEPR, that's the Center for Economic Policy and Research, if I'm not mistaken, Jeff Hauser, on what we should demand and expect of a democratically controlled House. Also on the program today, Republicans threaten Social Security and Medicare after doubling the deficit with tax cuts for millionaires. Meanwhile, Trump panics about his failure on immigration. Meanwhile, Trump panics about his biz partners revealed to have murdered a Washington Post columnist. Chuck Schumer blew it on judges, and then Chuck Schumer blew it on judges again. Another study shows Obama to Trump voters motivated by race and immigration. Key state Senate seats across the country get a big boost. And Facebook, and this is so hard to believe, lied about video hits to drive their ad rates and destroyed a bunch of print media publications along the way. The Republican ACA lawsuit could destroy pre-existing condition protections, even for employee coverage. And racist right-wingers, you can relax. We're going to assure you, you are safe from the Honduran caravan. And lastly, Robert Mueller prepping for post-midterm crapstorm. All this and more on today's program. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is Thursday. Michael is out.
It's going west.
Where is he? Iowa.
Idaho.
Iowa. He is doing a Norm Peterson. Is it the guy from Cheers?
Yeah, it's a Norm Peterson convention.
Yeah, it's weird. I can't believe that show is still pulling in people for that convention. Jordan Peterson, they're doing a conference on the international dark web. What do they call themselves? The intellectual dark web.
Yeah, intellectual dark web. Very much not international dark web.
Dark web, more like it.
There you go. And it's that kind of talk, Jamie, that keeps Dave Rubin from debating us, because he doesn't approve of that. It's very rude.
Sorry, Dave.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for apologizing. And folks, tomorrow, Brendan and I will be also headed west to Politicon, where on Sunday at 4:30. Now, I don't think it's live, but I do believe there will be video of this ultimately. I will be debating Charlie Kirk from Turning Points USA. And the topic will be, is Donald Trump good for the middle class?
Big league.
Big league. Yeah, we're gonna have a nice little debate, and I'll be moderating a panel on should we be socialists, and found out sometime last week there are no socialists on the panel, but I guess that makes the question more relevant, because if we already were socialists, then why would we even ask?
You'd be biased.
Right. There you go. But we will endeavor to persevere. And I'm also sitting on a panel talking about Mike Pence. I got to admit, I haven't dug into that one too much. The only thing I'm going to do, and someone maybe can do this during the show if they want. I interviewed an attorney at that Las Vegas tort conference, and I believe it was before the election. It could have been in October 2016, actually, or maybe in the spring of 2016, maybe the fall of 2015. A woman, and I can't remember her name, who had represented foster parents of kids with disabilities in Indiana. Mike Pence wanted to cut the program to provide them essentially an allowance to do that, to pay for tax cuts. Eventually, I think they were sued, and the publicity, he backed down from that because it doesn't, that people just sort of think that's a little bit mean. But someone wants to dig that up because I could use a refresher class and how horrible Mike Pence was.
Oh, yeah.
Outside of the context of being horrible as he is now. I mean, he was an incredibly unpopular governor in Indiana and was looking at the loss of his reelection campaign.
Remind me to send you the story on how his delayed response to an HIV outbreak had horrible consequences.
Yes, do. I recall that. I should bone up on that story. He's a horrible person. We're one of the things about, I in the past I've talked about being reluctant to participate in Politicon in any way, and but there's just too much reminders daily for me that in the world in which I work, right, within like the sort of the YouTube world, and more this show is the viewership in YouTube is expanding. Our audio podcast is still very good. Doesn't grow nearly at the rate that the YouTube is, and that's a function of just like I think where younger people are getting their news. And I'm glad we're getting younger people to watch the show. But I become increasingly aware of what's going on in that world, and the left, broadly speaking, is losing in that YouTube universe. Now, part of it is because there's enormous amounts of money being poured into this. There was a story the other day. I'm a little bit off track here, but there was a story the other day about this guy, Mark Steyn. We've talked about him in the past. He's this Canadian guy who writes, I think, for the National Review. He sometimes fills in for Rush Limbaugh. He had a deal with CRTV, which is some conservative, sort of like network of video stuff that Mark Levin ostensibly runs, but gets its funding from somewhere. And apparently he came down, he lives in, I think, northern Vermont or somewhere like that, and started to do his show, and it fell apart, right? He was difficult to work with, or maybe they didn't like the direction. Who knows? You don't know with these stories. That's sort of irrelevant. What was relevant is what their payout was for this guy's show. This is reported by the New York Post. Mark Steyn got a payout of $4 million. Now, it's conceivable to me someone like this signs a 5-year deal for an internet station. Highly improbable, but it's conceivable. Like, you hear about these things in radio, and maybe it's possible and this and that. There is no possible way that Mark Steyn was ever going to provide $4 million of revenue. Never mind the cost of production of the show. I'm talking in terms of there's just no way Mark Steyn was going to provide $4 million worth of revenue over a 7-year horizon. Never mind a 5-year horizon. If they're paying this guy out $4 million, someone is pumping in an enormous amount of money into these right-wing shows. Gavin McGinnis on the same network, the CRTV. There's no way this guy is driving the revenue that he's paid. There's no way. He's a loss leader, right? Like he's the one who's going to bring them some publicity, like that high-price show maybe on HBO that doesn't necessarily bring back revenue. But for an internet show like this that depends not on advertising as much as it does direct membership, those loss leader things are a little bit less relevant. So someone is pouring in and subsidizing this thing to the hilt. And nothing like that exists on the left. Nothing. There's nothing even remotely close. Nothing. And the closest is TYT getting money from the entertainment industry. And you see what they're doing with that money. They're not getting, they're not expanding their socialist programs, right? It's not like they're expanding ideologically. They're broadening their array of programs, but as one would in an entertainment play, there is no ideological money pouring in or even trickling in or dabbling in. And so, that is one of the things that has preoccupied me. And so going and in any way attempting to, and maybe I'll fail. I mean, Charlie Kirk goes on television far more than I do. I mean, this guy is constantly out there. He has a staff. Like, I got emails, and it's like to Team Kirk. And I'm like, wait a second. He's got a team? But
he's Captain Kirk.
But I'm going to try and go out there and to refute his ideas and perhaps make his appeal somewhat diminished. That's what I'm going to try and do. So I'm not sure how I got off on that tangent, but that's what my weekend's going to be. Hey, folks, one of today's sponsors is newsvoice.com/majority. As you know, a lot of these guys, we were just talking about this, and we have people who are in epistemological bubbles. There are enormous amounts of resources being poured in to narrow people's access to different news sources. There's a new media company out there that has come up with one of their own responses to these problems. It's called News Voice. It's an app for iOS and Android, which you can access for free if you go to newsvoice.com/majority. It gives you a personalized news feed by aggregating a mix of mainstream media sources, international sources, and independent media sources. Multiple sources are provided for each news story, both left and right. The entire app is fueled by crowdsourcing. You can upvote stories you think are important so more people will see them. You can add stories to the app. You can add a source that's missing for a story. It's meant to be a completely open and democratized news aggregator that lets you get to every side of every story. They also have a video interview series featuring guests from like Chris Hedges to AOC. Go download the app for free at newsvoice.com/majority. I put the link under this video. If you're watching it on YouTube, we'll put it in the podcast description, as we always do with any of the advertisers. Let's we'll get to these videos afterwards because we got to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Jeff Hauser. Not going to be a long, deep involved thing, but I wanted to get a notion and give people a notion of what is possible with just Democrats in controlling one house, and what we should be building our expectations now. One, as a way of making sure that people go out and vote, and two, to hold the Democrats to account. Depending on what the landscape is in terms of what party is in and out of power and what levers they have access to, we have to change in terms of how we pressure. In some respects, the pressure that we apply is a lot more efficient in the context of having people who are susceptible to that pressure. And Democrats are far more susceptible to pressure from the base, from a myriad of types of activism than are Republicans, simply because the Republicans drink from a different well. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with the director of the Revolving Door Project, Jeff Hauser. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program the director of the Revolving Door Project at the Center for Policy and Center for Economic Policy and Research, Jeff Hauser, on his piece, Dems Can Use Subpoena Power to Reclaim the Mantle of Populism. But there are other topics I want to talk to you about, Jeff. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
All right, let's start with this piece that you wrote the other day. This is, and let's just for a moment, and knock on wood, the Democrats take the House. This is obviously not a guarantee. You can enter into an election where there's a 95% chance that your preferred candidate might win, and apparently it's possible that 5 out of 100 times, maybe the non-preferred candidate wins. So hypothetically, of course. And let's not take this for granted, but it's also important, I think, to start to formulate notions of what we should expect from a Democratic Congress so that we're in a position to give them the message that these are our expectations. So how does this work? I mean, walk us through this.
So Congress has the ability to conduct oversight on any issue on which they might legislate or on which it comes directly within their purview. So obviously that includes the executive branch because Congress is the entity that funds the executive branch and passes the laws that govern how the Secretary of State operates, the Secretary of the Treasury, Department of Defense, you name it, all down the line. So there's significant oversight capabilities there, but Congress can also conduct oversight of businesses that conduct interstate commerce. So that includes Google, that includes Big Pharma, that includes the Koch brothers, that includes the oil industry, that includes payday lenders. Congress can subpoena, which is to say request under power of law that these corporations provide their CEOs to testify and any documents that Congress wants. Congress has enormous ability to check into what is going on in the world and bring attention to important issues. And that is something that House Democrats can do if they take gavels, even if they can't pass new laws because Trump would veto them.
Oh, and of course, we may not, Democrats may not have control of the Senate and et cetera, et cetera. So, all right. Well, so let me ask you this. How does do you have a sense of, how coordinated are the Democrats? How strategic are they in this? Or is it simply each committee chair is saying, okay, I have X or Y in my sights. These are the folks that I'm going to investigate. These are the issues that I want to explore, et cetera, et cetera. How broadly strategic is this?
So I think as of now, there are not a lot of strategic plans in place for oversight. For one reason, obviously, a majority has not been secured, and so that's somewhat understandable. For another, congressional staff resources, which are too thin across Capitol Hill in the overall, are especially thin on the side of the minority. So most committees only have 1 or 2 professional oversight staffers who are Democrats. And so they are under siege right now while trying to monitor what's going on in the government and with the Republican majority. So their ability to plan far ahead for what they would do if and when they had the majority is minimal, which is why I and others on the outside are going to look to provide some ideas as to what oversight could be. But the oversight tends to be largely conducted at the committee or subcommittee level, not by leadership, but leadership, of course, checks in frequently. And on some of the more potentially high-profile matters, like going after Donald Trump's taxes or issues in which there might be a fight over a subpoena, I suspect congressional leadership will be in close contact with committee chairs. So to use less D.C. language, that means Pelosi or whomever else might be the speaker in a hypothetical Democratic majority would be talking with people like Chairwoman Maxine Waters, who is slated to run the House Financial Services Committee.
But theoretically, I mean, this is fascinating. I think this is there's a little bit of this is a little bit weedy maybe, or a little bit inside baseball-y, but on some levels, this is the part of governance that I don't think that people really have an acute awareness of. So when Pelosi, whomever will be the majority leader, again, we're not counting our chickens yet, but we're hoping for chickens. Let's put it this way. And she goes to Maxine Waters. Maxine Waters, and it could be any other chairperson of any other committee. What they tell Pelosi in terms of their agenda in who they're going to pursue and what areas are they going to pursue is largely a function of people like you. And so here's my question. One, relative to the right, okay, when the conservatives are out of power, my sense is there's a lot more of right-wing yous than there are you. I want you to address that. And B, people should also understand that the resources that you have if you are, let's say, Trey Gowdy, and you are not pursuing any of these major corporations or any legitimate scandals, but yet you have all these resources, is exactly why Benghazi could exist for years. I mean, just address both those things.
Sure. The progressive ecosystem does not have robust support for progressive think tanks and the types of entities such as the Revolving Door Project housed at CEPR.net for people who are interested in our work. The support for institutions that would promote the idea of subpoenas of major corporations that would suggest that people like the CEOs of Google and Facebook shouldn't get to choose whether or not they testify before Congress, but they should be made to do so under threat of subpoena if necessary. There's just much less support for that. Whereas on the right, there's concentrated funding to come up with the best ideas for congressional hearings that could, say, undermine labor unions or go after public employees, for instance, at the Internal Revenue Service. So going back to the 1990s, there were an enormous number of hearings that made life really hard for people at the IRS and basically deterred IRS employees from going after high net worth individuals who are avoiding or evading their tax responsibilities. And that continued into Boehner's Congress with the really just totally fabricated Lois Lerner scandal, where they basically said that somebody was politicizing the enforcement of nonprofit tax law, which was just not true. But as a result, essentially far-right groups have now impunity to operate politically in violation of tax law because the IRS has been cowed by congressional Republicans. So what I would propose to congressional Democrats is that instead of deterring public employees from doing their job, they should deter corporate leaders from breaking the law. And then...
Go ahead. Continue.
And this is a systemic issue in terms of the ability of Congresses under Newt Gingrich or John Boehner to develop the agendas that were carried forth by George W. Bush in 2001 and Donald Trump in 2017. Those agendas were built up in opposition and in Congress. And what I would urge Democrats to do is to establish a governing agenda for 2021 and 2022 by establishing priorities and building out the evidence in case for action in 2019 and 2020 by holding high-profile committee hearings and engaging the public in the work of oversight.
All right, so let's talk about those, and so that people can understand here in simplistic levels. The by doing these investigations now, what you are doing is you are basically plowing the fields and preparing them to grow policy in the event that they're in the position 2 to 4, 6 years out to start to implement these policies, and you're developing a set of priorities. So from your perspective, like, give us a sense of what, if you were able to, if you had the resources and you were able to meet with, a dozen or half a dozen, or I don't know, 3 or 4 of the top of the leaders of top committees, and say, look, this is what your priority should be, and it should ultimately lead to some type of reform program like X. What would those things be?
Well, I mean, House Financial Services can step in and do a lot of the work that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is not doing by obtaining the records from the sort of financial services companies that are cheating consumers. The CFPB was created, under the leadership of Elizabeth Warren and others to protect people. House Financial Services can expose how Wells Fargo and Experian and payday lenders and student loan servicers are abusing ordinary Americans. The House Ways and Means Committee can go after tax avoidance and tax evasion, starting with the Trump family and Jared Kushner's businesses, but moving on down the line to Robert Mercer and just the entire growth of industry of tax avoidance in this country, private equity as well. And they can look at Big Pharma, and they can subpoena the records of Big Pharma and determine how much they are making in profits and how much they are spending in marketing compared to the research that they are doing to actually cure real medical needs of the country. And if you want to, for instance, have an agenda to reform pharmaceutical prices in this country, which is long overdue, you establish the need for that by a series of high-profile hearings in which you subpoena people, in which you have contentious back and forth between greedy executives and the representatives of the people, and a consensus can form for action.
So in other words, if in 2019 we see committee hearings where pharmaceutical executives have to concede that, in fact, we don't need to jack up these prices because of development, because we spend 80 cents on every dollar on marketing, then by 2021, when there is an attempt to, let's say, allow the government to negotiate prices, or even to have price controls on medication, or to limit the number of years, let's say, that there are patent protections for these medications, when the pharma executives say, but we won't be able to develop new product, you can say, well, look at this clip from a year and a half ago when you testified that most of your money is spent on marketing anyways. I mean, that's the idea there, right?
Right, and it's not just relying on what they will say voluntarily. It's also subpoenaing the documents so that you can have a forensic accountant go through the numbers and determine that their top line level that they concede is how much they spend on marketing versus research. The real number is X, because there are real books that these companies have, and then there are the books that we know of publicly, and they're often is a pretty considerable difference between what is known publicly and what is known privately. And that subpoena power is so critical in bringing to light information that the rich and powerful would like to keep hidden away.
There's two other issues you mentioned that I have particular interest in. One, we were talking about Sears on this program just the other day. I've talked about Toys R Us, Anchor, Glass, and others who major companies that were basically just sucked dry by private equity, and indicative of sort of the cottage industry that are being run out of major companies across the country, where where CEOs and maybe board of directors and a handful of equity owners are are just basically running these cottage industries, sucking. It's almost like legal embezzlement as far as I can tell. But what would, let's say they brought in the CEO of Sears, Lampert, and said, like, walk us through exactly what happened here. How did you take control of a company, drive it into bankruptcy, destroy the pensions of thousands of workers, lose the jobs of thousands of workers, and walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars more money? What kind of legislation could that lead to?
So I think it can lead to both to legislation, but also to potential enforcement priorities for an executive branch that were focused on enforcing the law. Because the big picture strategy of companies, of private equity raiders, is to strip assets and secure favorable tax advantages that the previous owner of a company was unable to realize. So basically, structuring the acquisition in such a way that something is more valuable to them than it was before, not due to superior management, but due to manipulation of the tax code, the willingness to break contracts with unions or workers or other stakeholders, cities that had given past subsidies in return for promises to keep businesses there, that sort of thing. Just a willingness to break a lot of rules and break a lot of agreements, some of which were legal, some of which were not. So there both are elements of the tax code that you'd want to figure out what were they abusing and what can we fix to actually conduct tax reform that would actually deter destructive behavior and encourage real investment. But it would also give a roadmap to a Treasury Department and an IRS that wanted to work on behalf of society as to how these companies do the tricks that they do and what should you look for as enforcement agencies. That roadmap would be very useful if you bring it out in public and you have a lot of angry accountants with some time on their hands explaining stuff, and then the IRS doesn't have to be outmanned as they so often are in battles with these companies, because you have a lot of people doing open source investigations into activities that are brought to light by congressional committees. But you also then create an impetus to hire enough IRS agents and forensic accountants and the like, so that the IRS is no longer always out-peopled. I mean, right. The IRS is just declining in size as corporations get bigger and more sophisticated at tax avoidance.
All right. You also mentioned Blackstone and the effect it's having on the housing market. Blackstone, for people who don't know, is, I think, the largest private equity company in the world. Is that, or how would you characterize them?
Yeah, they're at the cutting edge of figuring out ways to make money that other people might have too many shreds of morality to not go into. So, I mean, Blackstone worked in conjunction with Jared Kushner to put together Trump's first overseas trip, which, customarily the first overseas trip of an American president is to our loyal neighbors to the north, to Canada. Trump's involved a trip to Saudi Arabia, more famous for hands on a glowing orb that Trump had with a bunch of leaders in Saudi Arabia. But obviously now a little bit more infamous for the beginnings of the bromance between Jared Kushner and MBS and all the other horrors with Saudi Arabia. But Blackstone was actually the secret sauce behind that, because Blackstone was seeking to get more business out of Saudi Arabia, and they used their control over the Trump administration to make this trip happen. Blackstone basically goes where anyone with decency would not go, and they have become sort of vulture investors in real estate in this country. They're becoming a massive landlord, and they are about as bad a landlord as you can be. And they're just abusing a variety of housing and mortgage-related laws to make this very profitable for them. And it appears like they're going to do that even more with the new tax code.
Okay, all right. So just, walk us through that, because I'm sort of fascinated by this. And we should also say that Blackstone was, I think, founded. At least one of the founders was Pete Peterson, who seemed to spend his golden years trying to ruin those years of literally like 3/4 of Americans by trying to cut Social Security with a relentlessness and a dedication that would be admirable if it wasn't so horrific in terms of its implications for people. But all right, so give us a sense of of that dynamic. Blackstone goes in. There's a lot of foreclosed properties around the country. They buy them up sight unseen. They manage them from afar. They buy up enough of the housing product that they're able to control almost pricing on some level within specific markets, or what? What is the mechanism in which they're using, and what's problematic about it?
Well, part of it is that they have the sophistication to structure their investments and structure the debt that they rely upon to make these purchases in such a way that normal investors can't compete. And so properties are more valuable to Blackstone than they are on the market. And that means that they can go in big. They can develop market power, which means that as the market recovers, they can raise prices precipitously for just general reasons that monopoly are bad. They can gain market power. That's not quite monopoly, but gives them some ability to increase prices. Their distance from these communities means that they suffer no personal reputational harms if and when they act like slumlords. If someone might be a bad landlord who owns like a few properties in a city, but he or she can be shamed locally, and there's some ability of the local authorities to rein in that conduct. And that is just not true when you have these essentially oligarchs based in New York running housing in like Fresno, California. There's just no reach, practically speaking, of the authorities in Fresno to rein in the sort of mismanagement. But the big thing is that the tax bill written, at the behest of Donald Trump, who was at least formerly a real estate magnate, and also with Jared Kushner, also a real estate magnate, is incredibly beneficial to housing and to ownership and all sorts of debt and tax-related tricks that can be conducted. And so if you are able to avail yourself of all the real estate tax benefits in the tax laws currently written, you can make an enormous amount of money in real estate. And Blackstone is incredibly well positioned to do that. And they're shifting their business model to really heavily focus on real estate as a result.
That's amazing. We have a massive, the biggest private equity company in the world, and they are literally shifting they're reorienting their entire business because of a change in the tax code. I think is as good of an illustration of the implications of this stuff as any.
Yeah, and I think what's the great thing about oversight on corruption of this sort is that you can readily tie what seems to be unique in terms of Trump and Kushner and his administration's sort of individual peccadillos about corruption to the substantive harm of real human beings, the people who are living in communities that are being devastated by Blackstone's mismanagement. And it's one thing if politicians are a little shady and a little corrupt, and obviously I think we should push back against that, but people can also become somewhat inured to that. Unfortunately, expectations in our country for politicians are pretty low right now. So to the extent to which corruption seems to just be about immorality in our leadership, I don't know how much it excites people, but you can build a political movement if you start pushing hard against the corruption that is tangibly undermining the lives of ordinary Americans. And I think that congressional committees can start to make that connection for people by contentious hearings, by actually fighting against corporations that will fight back and raising up these sort of controversies, because people really should understand that politics are about whether or not housing price, how the housing market is in your city. That's what the stakes are. It's not just some sort of fight of symbols on television. It's real life.
And it is incumbent upon the Democrats and the people who are running these hearings, to the extent that this happens, to be able to sort of tie these smaller stories of, let's say what Jared Kushner is doing into the broader systemic problems that are created by government policy or fixed by government policy.
Yeah, absolutely. So corruption is not just an issue of morality, it's an issue of tangible economic reality. Who wins and who loses in our economy is very frequently determined by government, but in ways that I think civil society and government has not done a good enough job of explaining this to people. And so I think the understanding how people in hidden jobs in the executive branch, or at least like very little understood jobs, like at the Securities and Exchange Commission or FDIC, and all sorts of acronym organizations that people don't know much about at all. But the decisions people make have enormous consequences for who has what in our society and whether we become more or less fair economically.
I want to maybe touch on that in a moment, but I got to get your take. There was this story this week is that, just shifting gears slightly, because I know this is stuff that you also have, at the very least, pay some attention to. Chuck Grassley announced that despite the deal, maybe this wasn't part of the deal, but over the past 45 days, maybe it is, or 60 days, Chuck Schumer has made two separate deals that fast-tracked the nomination proceedings of now 30 federal judges who will sit on the federal judiciary for the rest of their lives. These are Trump picks. I should remind people, this is not like some type of like bipartisan crew of people. I don't know how many of them came from the Federalist Society, but I would bet that it would be close to 30. And yet, Chuck Grassley this week says, incidentally, we're going to have hearings. I think they had hearings yesterday and only 4 senators showed up. All these people are going to get confirmed, or at very least they'll go through their confirmation hearings without any scrutiny. What's your take on this? I mean, let me put it this way. Am I completely out of my mind that Chuck Schumer doesn't seem to be following politics?
Chuck Schumer has entirely mishandled this situation. Basically, McConnell, the move McConnell made was to say that the Senate would be in session more often than expected in September and October because there are more Democratic incumbents up for re-election in November than Republicans. There are really only 2 Republican incumbents in the Senate who have tough re-election races, Heller and Cruz from Nevada and Texas. And so the idea was that now I will take hostage the Democrats and say that if you want your incumbents to be like Joe Donnelly or Heidi Heitkamp to be able to campaign back in their home state, you will have to give me a bunch of judges. And this was a false choice because there's absolutely no reason why the Democratic incumbents who are up for re-election have to be in Washington, D.C. for each and every vote. I mean, voters understand that there's an election upcoming, and senators spending more time in their state talking to the people in the state rather than casting votes that are not going to be decisive on judicial nominations is just not that big a deal.
Right. These are let's be clear. These are losing votes, right? Like even if they were to vote in the right way, relative to their base. I mean, I could make an argument that perhaps not being there to not vote on these people is probably better for them politically, right?
It's certainly not. I mean, Republicans who keep claiming that Democrats voting against Kavanaugh were at some risk. The argument that they had to be in D.C. to vote against these other nominees made no sense. Basically, the parliamentary trick is that all you needed is some senator local to D.C. every 30 hours or so. So Chris Van Hollen or Ben Cardin from Maryland or the Virginia senators or the Delaware senators could just show up and deny unanimous consent, and then it would take 30 hours for each of these. It takes 30 hours of Republicans being on the floor in order to keep pushing these judicial votes. And the rest of the Democratic senators could have done whatever they wanted, which presumably would have meant campaigning for re-election. But there was among the groups that are most sympathetic to Chuck Schumer but work on judicial nominations, there was a consternation at this deal by Chuck Schumer, but there was a belief that at least at a minimum, surely he got Grassley to agree to not hold committee hearings during the period in which the Senate was in recess. And it turns out that rather important detail was actually not part of Schumer's deal with McConnell.
But what's the deal?
That did not involve either Feinstein or Grassley. Schumer just made a deal with McConnell and wrote it like a newbie who had never done politics before.
But I'm not even clear what the deal is. Isn't a deal? Don't you need two components to a deal, like a give and a get? I get what the give was. I just don't know what the get was.
I mean, they would say that essentially that they not only got their senators back to campaign, but they also weren't missing votes. And as you and I discussed, the ability to avoid missing a few votes on judges seems like a very minimal consideration.
I would say that you could crisscross the land for decades and not meet a single voter who is going to make a decision on their vote based upon their senators missing a vote to confirm a circuit or district judge, right? I would say the number of people who vote in that way probably rivals the number of people who vote under false names, who take the names of the dead and go so do you, first off, do you have any sense as to, and I don't know your relationship with staffers on do you have any sense as to what the Democratic Senate caucus feels about these things, A, and B, what Chuck Schumer is thinking? Is it possible that Chuck had a bunch of weddings to attend, and so he really needed to go? Or, is there any even that explanation, I'd be it's not the decision I would make, but what is it just an unimaginable amount of sheer incompetence that's involved here? I just don't understand it.
I think that for about 6 to 9 months in 2017, after the Women's March, Senate Democrats under Schumer acted like they were not just in the minority, but were a part of the resistance, and that they recognized that this is a fraught period in American history, and they needed to fight everything. And that fighting spirit has abandoned the caucus in the main. According to reports, Senator Warren was the only one to express any opposition to this decision. I think people just wanted to get out of D.C. They didn't think about the details, and they're also just not used to the idea that you might want to fight on every judicial nomination. You would think the fact that the Republicans fought so tooth and nail to block all of Obama's judicial nominations going back to 2009, even when Senate Democrats had between 58 and 60 senators, you would think that the Senate Democrats would have a little bit more fighting spirit on the issue of judges. But I think what we've learned is that Senate Democrats as a whole do not care about the nitty-gritty political issues that are not obvious. And government matters, judiciary matters, and conceding these battles without a fight is really depressing.
Is that a function of there being on the right people who are heavily invested in the outcomes of what, let's say, the D.C. Circuit Court or other court of appeals around the country, how they rule on issues of of corporate responsibility and regulation and access to courts, et cetera, et cetera. So like when the Koch brothers say to Mitch McConnell, hey, look, we want these judges. Judges are important to us, and if you want us to open up our purse strings for the upcoming election, like there's nobody like that on the left, right? Tom Steyer is not, with all due respect, is not coming up to Chuck Schumer, or someone from the financial industry is not coming up and saying like, we really want judges who are going to uphold the right, the ability of the government to regulate the financial services, or we really want judges who are going to promote the idea that the government has the ability to regulate on environmental grounds or access to the courtrooms for tort laws. Like there's just no pressure on, it seems to me, on any of these Democratic senators, nor the leadership from donors and B, which is donors, the electorate. Like the left just doesn't understand the relevance of this stuff.
Yeah, basically, inside baseball in Washington has enormous consequences for how people live their lives and the stresses and dangers that they encounter in their everyday lives. And corporate America realizes this, and they have an enormous amount of paid lobbyists and just Washington monitors who provide intelligence to corporations and rich people about what's happening and what really matters for their bottom line. And the left lacks the equivalent. I mean, that's why I founded the Revolving Door Project, was to kind of look into the issues that are a little bit under the radar in order to try to provide a modicum of a counterbalance to the advantage that corporate America has on that. And the hope going forward is that doing that sort of watchdog work on the left can link up with the net roots to provide a counterbalance, because you've seen such an explosion of interest in politics and the emergence of groups like Indivisible. And the hope is that working with this new sort of found passionate grassroots in American politics and providing them some understanding of the key issues that are happening under the radar, that those groups can then provide pressure on leaders like Chuck Schumer to do better, because right now the status quo is not working well.
The conversion of this energy, electoral energy, into activist energy that deals with these issues, I think is going to be the foremost important thing to happen after this election. Jeff Hauser, Executive Director of the Revolving Door Project at the Center for Economic Policy and Research. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
It was a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. All right, folks. God. It drives me freaking nuts that
Chuck Schumer?
Well, I mean, look. See, this is what's super frustrating. Chuck Schumer drives me up a freaking wall, right? Like, I would spend 3 days a week protesting out in front of his house. I would just bring Saul, and we would just sit there and protest. But I would look around and I realize, like, there's nobody else here. This is not going to be effective. And the broad swath of people that I get annoyed with when I hear, like, when I have conversations like this where it becomes so clear that we are, that the broad left seems to completely forfeit 3/4 of the game, right? Like it's like we just want the superhero to come in and fix it all. And
yeah, that's what I'm always saying.
Right. And it is, what, are you being facetious?
Of course I am.
Well, I'm not saying you.
I'm part of the left.
Well, I know, but I'm saying yes, I am too. And I don't say that. But I think broadly speaking, the left wants to have a superhero that comes in and solves this all. There is, there is just not a lot of organizing or agitation around, broadly speaking. Obviously, some people who even care to engage in the sort of like small bore stuff that is where large changes in society happen over the course of 5 or 10 years, right? Like, we have moments where there was movements, certainly during the Obama years, where we had, very active coalitions of activists who were centered around housing and going and protesting in front of Blackstone. I mean, there was, we don't see these things sustained. We don't see these things funded by the donor class for obvious reasons, by even like, and the conversion of this energy that has gone into these elections, and understandably so, to these issues. But it takes like education, and largely none of this stuff is, I get annoyed at the, I'm not going to say who I'm thinking of, but they're not in this room, of just sort of like these broad strokes about like, Jill Stein's going to come in and fix all this, right? Like, give me an effing break, right? Like, pay attention to these smaller things.
Well, it's like watching baseball, like just when the playoffs start and being like, why don't they hit a home run right now?
Right, exactly. And it is the, like, as frustrated as I am with Chuck Schumer is just an empty vessel. And he's getting pushed in certain directions. And there's no one pushing in the right directions on this guy.
Well, I think you would enjoy spending some time on the anti-capitalist left if you don't like hero worship, because we're pretty much anti-hero.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everybody. I think that's the case. I mean, I think there's. It would be nice if on the capitalist left, or or at least the somewhat like, there was it, because unfortunately, for the sake of our politics, the vast majority of the people on the left are still at least capitalist friendly on some level, and
that number is shrinking every day.
Indeed, it is, but not at the rates that are really, I think, going to
well, relative to socialism, but not to the exclusion of capitalism.
Well, look, ultimately, we have theoretically a mixed economy now, right? It's just that the mixture is not quite, is largely out of whack.
It's a bit fascisty.
Yeah. And, but these structural things, I mean, it would be nice if we were to come in and have like a large structural makeover. But in the meantime, there needs to be some addressing of the smaller elements of this structure, right? Because theoretically, this structure, you could have cheaper housing if these things weren't happening. You could have more protections for consumers and financial products. You could have much less expensive pharmaceuticals, which drives a lot of the cost of healthcare. You could do the same thing with medical devices. I mean, there could be material benefits delivered to every single American within the context of our structures as is, if there was a broader understanding on the left, a deeper understanding of the left, and paid more attention to this stuff rather than the stuff that is a little bit more shiny.
I totally agree with you.
I would assume everyone does. I always do. I always do.
I'm actually preparing some sort of presentation for the next DSA meeting on how, because a lot of people joined after the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing because they were like very angry and they want to do something. They want to get involved. So I'm preparing a presentation on how our different working groups can oppose bad Supreme Court decisions on a very practical level, as well as the system that led to Brett Kavanaugh in the first place.
Well, the thing that I like the most about DSA as an organization is, A, that they broadly speaking, I think are the most savvy about politics, both in terms of like, and a lot of this came out of Occupy, frankly. I mean, at least this impetus of like setting up committees that were actually like very, very astute in terms of policy. The Occupy Committee on Financial Reform was developed probably one of the most sophisticated documents that came out of the entire push for financial reform. And on top of that, though, much more so than Occupy, largely because of the structure of the thing, the DSA is a lot more sophisticated about politics in terms of power. And so it's not just, sophisticated when it comes to sort of like policy analysis, but also in terms of like, how do we strategically deploy what power we have in such a way that brings us closest to our goals? And there's not, and they do that without the sort of like cross-purpose incentives that may come from an activist organization that is in D.C. and relies on their funding as access to donors or to certain legislators. I mean, yeah.
It's interesting to me how DSA keeps getting these bumps when there is such a massive failure of especially the main party. And I think that speaks really well to how they've positioned themselves.
Right. And there's nothing about Kavanaugh per se that is, a function of, how can I phrase this? Let's put it this way. It is not obvious that the response to Kavanaugh is democratic socialism, right? Like you could be opposed to Kavanaugh, many, many, many people are, and democratic socialism, you can
still be a cold warrior.
You could be like pro Merrick Garland and be opposed to Kavanaugh. It's just that I think that the idea is that there's no entities that provide what I've just sort of described, I think, on the left, that kind of outlet.
Well, it's our job to make those connections for people and to facilitate them, making them on their own.
Indeed. But I guess my point is we can't do it on our own. We need other entities to do it, and entities that are out there saying like that the solution has nothing to do with like, that it's completely irrelevant, these judges, or that, Chuck Schumer operates in a complete vacuum. Like, you can blame Chuck Schumer, and I think it's political malpractice. But it's also, Mitch McConnell's not sitting there going like, we need to do Kavanaugh because Mitch McConnell is doing it because his incentive structure is such that, like the little rat that he is, he knows where the cheese is.
Well, we can understand the limitations of focusing on individuals when we, criticize someone like Jordan Peterson, but when it comes like to somebody like Chuck Schumer, we all of a sudden, get a bit more reductive about it.
Oh, yeah. We can hate the player and the game, like I always say. Like, I don't want to let any of these people off the hook for being rules. But at the end of the day, you could put someone else in the same system and get the same result.
I think that's true, but I'm not saying don't hate the player. And I'm not saying don't hate the game. I'm saying understand there's more than just one player here. like there's other players that are also not doing their job. And this is, an indictment of us as much as it is an indictment of Chuck Schumer. I would imagine there's no one listening to the sound of my voice who has, well, I'm not going to say no one, particularly in terms of this audience, but that we don't have a sizable group of people in this audience who have written Chuck Schumer's office about, circuit judges or district court judges, or about these type of small bore things. And unfortunately, Tom Steyer's not going to do it. So if we don't have $100 million to dump into these races as an individual, we need a mass of people who are doing that to create pressure. And I'm not just saying, phone call, whatever the form in which pressure takes. But
yeah, we need an inside-outside strategy.
Indeed.
Right? We need to build a massive militant labor movement that's capable of shutting the country down. And, maybe you write some letters to Chuck Schumer on the weekend.
Indeed. And then everybody will do it. We'll go to the Union Hall, write letters, et cetera, et cetera.
Not
All right, folks.
exclusive.
Hey, just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member of the Majority Report by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you will become a member for just pennies a day, dimes a day. I don't know. What is it, 50 cents a day? Was this show not, like this free show, was that not worth 50 cents? Well, if it wasn't, then we're going to give you more. If you become a member today, if you become a member right now, you will have access to the fun half, which is happening today. And in fact, you will have access to the fun half that happened yesterday and the day before. In fact, you can go back over the course of now 7+ years. Wait a second. We're super close to the, it could be today. When did this show start? Was it 7 years to the day? October 18th? I don't know. I think we did our soft launch around then. Holy crap. Anyways, you can go back and you get 7 years of, and it's searchable on our app at majorityapp.com. You can search for, go back, see who our first guest is. I can't believe it. Still talking about the same damn stuff. I think it was the guy who wrote the book Winner Take All. Nevertheless, the point is, for just pennies a day, you can become a member of the Majority Report. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. They have been with us since almost day one. In fact, they predate this show in terms of support for these causes, and they were the ones who gave free coffee to people during the Madison protests. This week on the Antifada, Jamie.
Oh, yeah. So this week on the Antifada, we took questions from you, the listeners, or maybe not.
You didn't take questions from me.
From the listeners.
Okay.
Anyone who's listening right now who also listens to the Antifada, I'm talking to you. We got some great questions. So good job, everyone. We talked about my political tendency, which apparently people were still a little unclear about. How often we question our own beliefs. We talked about identity politics and gave a little take on Angela Nagel because people still seem to be talking about her. And we talked about Comrade Gritty, who is, we haven't quite decided yet if he's actually mocking the working class Philadelphia sports fans or if he is, like a real man of the comrade of the people, but could be a little
we
bit
tell
of both.
people who Comrade Gritty is because this is like a meme that's getting out there that people I think are not.
Yeah, so Gritty is the new mascot for the Philadelphia Flyers, which is a hockey team in Philly. He has quickly been, I don't even want to say appropriated because it's hard to appropriate something that's already yours, but he's been appearing in many memes going around that are like anti-fascist and anti-capitalist in nature. So it's pretty cool.
And Matt?
Yeah, Literary Hangover. The Corey Robin Reactionary Mind episode is now available on YouTube for people who want to listen to that there. So check it out. Literary Hangover on YouTube.
There you go, folks.
All right. Patreon.com/theantifada, YouTube.com/theantifada. I always forget to do that.
646-257-3920 is the number, 646-257-3920 if you want to be a part of this program. Don't forget to check out Michael Brooks' show. You can find that on all of your favorite podcast servers or on Patreon and on YouTube. Going to take a quick break. Come right back with the fun half. of the fun half in the majority report.
Majority report. Is what.
Yeah, it's the majority report. I just wanted to double check on that. It is the majority report. And as such, we will go to the phones. Let's go to calling from a 210 area code. Who might this be? Who might this be?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say your name again. Brenda's.
Yeah, John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. Hello, John. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good interview with Jeff Hauser. A question I have is, will the Trump White House submit to congressional oversight at all, or will they force Democrats to jail people who refuse to testify in public? You know, because last year many cabinet officials, such as DNI Dan Coates, refused to answer questions put before them, and they didn't invoke executive privilege. They just refused to answer the question because the White House told them not to answer, and they made up some story about anything they talked about in the White House is off limits. So that's a big question in my mind. Also, on Chris Hayes' show on Tuesday night, you said that Kirk himself or Politicon wanted to change the topic that
Right.
you were able to, as far as the topics. I think a good topic would be that you could bring up would be to show how Republicans are embracing authoritarianism and bring up Bob Altemeyer's research. And I think that's a good idea because right now you're kind of playing on his domain when you're just addressing how Trump is helping the middle class. So what do you think of that?
Well, I mean, listen, I don't know. I don't think I'm playing on his domain. I don't believe that Trump is helping the middle class. And I have I think I have a strong argument to make about that, John. And so I don't want to, my sense is that when I think I mentioned this the other day, that they wanted to bring this more into a culture war. Right. So the topic of which is more popular, which is more radical, the popular left or the popular right. First off, I literally don't know what that question means. Like, I don't know what they mean by the popular right. I don't know what they mean by the popular left. And I don't know what they mean by radical. Like, in this country, is it radical that white people should feel supremacy over non-white people? Is it radical? Is misogyny radical? Is oligarchy radical in the context of the United States? Like, maybe not. Maybe it's more radical to sort of say that broadly we should have, more, our government should function on behalf of all the people. Maybe that is a more radical proposition. I just don't know what the relevance of it is. And it clearly was a question designed to go to the well of like the left-wing mob and all this. And I don't want to get into that type of stuff. It seems a little silly. I think there is a very good case to be made that Donald Trump is not good for the middle class, and frankly, not good for just about everybody in this country except for a small select few. And I don't know, to say that Charlie Kirk or his followers or Trump's followers are authoritarian, like, I don't know where you go from there in the context of that debate. And so, that's, I feel pretty confident about this topic. Maybe I'll do a good job. Maybe I won't do a good job. Like I say, Charlie Kirk is, appears to me to be a very astute guy. And,
certainly dresses well.
He certainly dresses well. And that's why he gets paid the big bucks.
Also, like, radical is subjective, but it's also like morally neutral, right? Like, just because something's radical doesn't mean that it's good or bad.
Well, that's
right?
what I'm saying. And it's also, you can interpret it in a multitude of ways, and it's a silly type of question. And it's just like, it is radical is a coded word that is means something different, to people who have a a genuine sense of language and people who watch Fox. And so that is not a helpful, debate to have. What else you got, John? Anything else?
Yeah, I just want to focus on Bakari Sellers, who's going to be on the socialist panel. You know, he's somebody who's very much a conservative Democrat. He's a 34-year-old representative, former state representative of South Carolina. And you know, after after AOC's primary, he penned a op-ed in CNN and saying Ocasio-Cortez is a democratic socialist, but her victory does not signal a move among Democrats toward that ideology. It does, however, send a clear message that there's a generational demographic and tonal shift underway among the Democratic electorate. And if congressional Democrats want to remain relevant, they need to reckon with this change. They need a succession plan. Without a succession plan, Democrats are likely to see more contested primaries, putting old versus young candidates and the people of color versus white candidates. There's also be more inter-party squabbles between older establishment members and younger progressives who's had enough of politics as usual. So, I mean, so his answer essentially, he named 6 more younger congressional members of the Democratic Party. Then he mentions Randall Woodfin, Chucky Lumumba, Stacey Adams. You know, and that's good that he's mentioning, and Justin Fairfax also, that he's mentioning, you know, these Southern black progressives. But at the same time, you know, after AOC won, you know, you had victories by Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and, you know, they're shoo-ins to win their elections. And so, you know, I just think that him saying that these people are winning because they're young and because, you know, they're minorities is just completely off base. It's utterly absurd. They're winning because...
But John, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive propositions. Like, I think frankly, their youth, their identity as people of color, I think is very helpful to them. I mean, I think that, like, you know, if you talk to Sean McElwee, who has been as accurate as anybody in predicting victories, and I would add gender too, is also, you know, at least in this era, those are all net positives. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And I think their policies obviously are also hugely important. Like, I don't think that you could run as a woman of color. Like, if AOC's politics were more akin to Mark Warner's, let's say, I don't think she would have done nearly as well. You know, so they're not mutually exclusive propositions. I got to read that piece. I can tell you Shakwa Lumumba is not a conservative Democrat. He ran as literally the most radical mayor in America.
Right. That's my point. My point is that you know, he's embracing these people, and Marcos Malitsis is doing the same thing. He's actually going further, like on an August 5th thing on Meet the Press. He's embracing socialism, but neither one of these people will acknowledge that it's Sanders and his ideology that's moving people towards the left. And so that's where kind of that's what bothers me a little bit is the contradiction. They know this is happening, and so they embrace that if it's on like a you know,
but
if
it's not
it's
just
happening.
Sanders.
But it's,
I mean, let's be honest. It's not just Sanders, and I can track this before Sanders, right? I mean, and you know, even the Senate, like in 2015, right, was voting to expand Social Security. That was so monumental when for a decade we were arguing to the U.S. Senate, the Democrats in the Senate, do not cut Social Security. And that change predates Sanders. So there is a move to the left. Did Bernie Sanders increase the popularity and make it possible for people like AOC? In my mind, without a doubt. But I mean, I will, as moderator, John, try and make sure that they give some credit to Bernie Sanders. I'm not sure that that is the most important thing to Bernie Sanders. You know, like, we can't get caught up. It is a real mistake. Now, I understand if you're making this complaint from the or you know, this point from, you know, from a 2020 perspective, and you know, and you can be honest with me, and I can be honest with you, John. Like, I mean, if that's what it's about, want to put a stake, you know, you want to put a flag in the ground and say, you know, Bernie needs his credit from you know, because we want to help him in terms of
give it to me,
the 2020 primary. But in terms of, like, you know, political discourse and sort of like what is effective, you know, who cares? Like, you know, like, who?
Well, I mean, it's part of sociology, and the fact that Medicare for all, the fact that it's so popular is almost entirely on Bernie's shoulders. I mean, he's the one that convinced all these people. Even in July, nobody signed on to it. By September, you know, you had a lot of people signing on to it, almost half the caucus.
The reason why, well, there's a lot of reasons why, but the primary reason why Medicare for All is so popular is because of the nature of the program. Did Bernie Sanders was Bernie Sanders the platform to introduce and to promote this? Without a doubt. Absolutely. But if we have a whole party, I don't care what you call them, but a whole party that embraces and is willing to pass Medicare for All and insists on doing it without Bernie Sanders as their leader of their party, I would think the first person who would be okay with that would be Bernie Sanders, right? Like, I think, I you know, like, Bernie Sanders entered the race in 2016 to do exactly what he's done. And he's probably had so much more success than he could have imagined in 2015. In fact, he did, which is why he, you know, wasn't prepared to really win that primary. And because he had more success, I think, than he imagined he could have. And I think if he had realized that beforehand, and I don't know how one would have, he would have been better situated to win. So I just don't think that, you know, I just think it's a mistake. Even if you want Bernie Sanders to be the nominee in 2020, to make it all about getting him credit, because I don't even think that's what he wants. I don't even think that's what's helpful. I mean, I think it's the idea is that he, you know, people know that this proposal is, you know, largely associated with him. It's not obviously unique to him, and it wasn't, you know, he wasn't the first person to come up with it. But, you know, so...
And don't forget the power of mass movements in determining these things as well, right? Because Bernie, among many other people, has been pushing these ideas for decades. And why was there suddenly a mass movement that elevated him to a viable candidate for president? It was a response to worsening conditions within our society where people are being squeezed to the point where they have no future and they can't afford to see a doctor and the costs are only going up. And so Bernie comes out of that movement and he expresses it in the electoral sphere.
And I would say, I mean, I would also argue, if we're going to get that having a center left, centrist president as a foil, you know, just it's basic physics. It gives you more leverage to spring to the left. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that have contributed to this, not the least of which, you know, the financial crisis in 2008. But I'll bring this up, John. Don't worry. Apparently the panel is going to be on C-SPAN, the socialist panel.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I hear.
Okay.
I will agree with you, John.
The socialist, non-socialist panel.
I will agree with you in that Bernie, as of now, is the only mainstream politician, or one of the only ones, definitely the only one who could run for president, who is going to express these ideas, these class politics, in any real kind of way.
Appreciate the call, John.
John from San Antonio, what is he feeling? Nobody knows.
There we go. Let's go to the phones here. Calling from a 781 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, it's Mike from Massachusetts. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mike from Massachusetts. What's on your mind?
A couple things. The first thing I wanted to bring up, because I can't be the only one frustrated about this. It's kind of frustrating and disappointing to see that, like, there isn't much mobilization from Democrats to help people like Jay Gonzalez and Ben Jealous who are running against blue state Republican governors. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on, like, why there seems to be no energy towards unseating those Republicans, or if you're also similarly frustrated.
I am frustrated. You know, I think it's just, my guess is, I mean, I would love to see Ben Jealous as Governor Mellon. I think the problem is that Hogan is just too popular there. And I think at this late stage, right? Like, you know, if in August the polling is Ben Jealous is within 7 points, right? Or 6 points, I think you would see a lot more enthusiasm. I think that's just the reality of it. Like, why? I don't know enough about living in Maryland, but I don't know enough about Hogan's policies. For instance, to say like, oh, this is where he should be dinged on, or that's where he should be dinged on, or this is what people in Maryland are upset about. So, you know, that's what it is. It's frustrating, but resources got to go into races that are more winnable,
more competitive.
Yeah. I mean, that's just.
I mean, I'll just say in North
Sucks.
Dakota, it's a very red state, but for the longest time, it had 2 Democrat senators that.
Democratic,
sorry.
Jesus
The Republicans.
Christ, Frank Luntz sitting over there.
The Republicans couldn't touch them, and they didn't really try until those guys retired.
Appreciate the call, Mike. Share your frustration. Let's take one more call before we go to some sound. You calling from a 478 area code. Who might this be?
This is the anti-hero of the left. You can think of me as a Southern Wolverine type, or perhaps Walter White. This is Jeff from Georgia saying.
Jeff from Georgia. Well done, Brendan.
I love it.
Jeff from Georgia. Was the Wolverine thing that wasn't a reference to Red Dawn?
No.
Oh, okay.
I think yellow spandex and adamantium claws. I don't know if you're into that kind of thing, but that's more what I had in mind.
No, I'm not.
Hey man, I'm calling you from the heart of Georgia, of course. And normally I don't spend a lot of time talking about elections, but you know, Stacey Abrams got a tight race here. New poll out today. I don't know if anybody saw it. It's basically dead heat's 47-46. Kip's up by 1. Good news. Vote turnout, voting started this week. It is up. Well,
I saw a huge amount of lines, pictures of a huge amount of lines, people waiting 3 or 4 hours to early vote.
Yeah, which people should take as this is a sort of double-edged sword, right? Like, on the one hand, it is extremely sad to see people waiting in line to do something as the easiest vote. It doesn't take that long. It should be easy and quick. But on the other hand, that means the electorate is incredibly motivated to vote. According to polls, the 2 issues they're most motivated to vote about is health care, number 1, and number 2 is immigration. Obviously, that second one cuts probably both ways, right? I think a lot of Republicans here are also very motivated. I think immigration is their quote-unquote top issue because they got...
About 4 years ago, maybe it was, I know that Georgia implemented a fairly draconian law about punishing or about either housing or employment for undocumented immigrants. And you had a year where a lot of peaches hit the ground, is my understanding. How much?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah.
How much has that resonated? Like, how much do people have the memory of that, or was that just sort of like narrowly felt?
I mean, I think it has. It does resonate somewhat with some Republican voters because that is absolutely true. That they did implement draconian immigration procedures, and we really could not get the labor necessary to harvest crops that year. And I live in a county with a lot of farmland, and I live just a stone's throw away from an orchard or two. And I know for a fact that they suffered, and the legislature had to reverse themselves almost immediately. Just as fast as they could on their part-time ass schedule. That doesn't matter. But I think what's curious about it to me is that I think a lot of Democrats are also motivated by immigration, and that's why they're telling pollsters that's their number one issue. And in terms of health care, ain't nobody excited to vote about Brian Kemp's health care plan. He got no health care plan. His health care plan is do less. Right. Which is not really resonating with the people in a way that you expect, obviously. Whereas Stacey Abrams, she's not a liberal. She calls herself that, so she ain't no socialist and stuff like that. But she really could be a fine governor if they give her one hand at least to wield power with if she gets in there. The only reason I talk about elections so much this time of year is because honestly, I'm convinced. This is the last thing I'll say. I'll let you go, Sam. The Republican Party has become a death cult. They are willing to defend a way of life that will quite probably lead to massive degradation in civilization for the entire planet, just so they can have their manicured lawns and their cheap gas and their $7 minimum wage and whatever. This shit will kill us all. And it's possible the Democratic Party is an insufficient vehicle for change. We're all fucks, right?
Right.
But it's also possible that they're not, and that they might be a vehicle for change. And at times when fascism is really creeping up on us, it is more important than ever not to indulge in any dumb thinking. You are going to see people, not just our nemesis, whose name I will not speak, but there are others. There are lots of others. Out there whose vote is about a brand, whose vote is about an identity. It's a foolish exercise of narcissism. Don't listen to those people. Don't care how eloquent they are. You listen to Jeff from Georgia. You vote for Stacey Abrams. You vote for the rest of them. Y'all have a good one now.
There you go, Jeff from Georgia. All right, let's go into. Okay. So since we've heard from Jeff from Georgia. You are all familiar with the enormous amount of voter suppression that is taking place in Georgia this go through. Kemp, who is the Secretary of State, this is the guy who's in charge of voting, also happens to be running for governor and has a unique power to shape the electorate in a way that is highly inappropriate. And he's already disenfranchised tens of thousands of voters, a huge percentage of whom are African American. It must be a total coincidence. But the Secretary of State, to be fair, has released a video to show you what happens if you are somehow ensnared by their draconian policies and can't vote on the day of the election. And what's very cute about this, there's two things. One that's cute about it is it's all done with kids. All the kids are playing the roles of the various voters and voting officials. And then the other really cute thing about it is apparently, since Kemp knows that the vast majority of people he has disenfranchised from their votes are African American, the girl playing the person who can't vote is African American.
Voting location. The process is exactly the same as voting in person on election day.
The white kid, he comes in.
You will complete and sign a voter certificate, provide an acceptable form of photo identification, and then vote on an electronic voting machine.
Vote on electronic voting machine. He gets a sticker. I voted. Pause it for 1 second. Now, we should tell you, these electronic voting machines, you'll recall after the last election in 2016, they scrubbed some of the servers right before they were supposed to be investigated. I'm sure that was a coincidence, too. So it's electronic voting machine, folks. There you go.
Technology is bullshit.
Well,
in New York, we use punch cards and they work amazingly.
Yes, but in New York, there's far less people than in Okay, let's watch the rest of this video. He's got a sticker. Oh, here comes the
don't have an acceptable form
girl
of photo
who's
identification
black.
when you're at the polling
she doesn't have the
location,
ID.
both on Election Day and during advanced voting.
working.
You can vote a provisional ballot. If you vote a provisional ballot, you have 3 days after Election Day to return to your county elections office to show your photo identification
that's convenient.
for your ballot to be accepted.
You get to
and
make
counted.
another special trip to vote after you've waited 4 hours in line to vote. 3 days. Now, voting is on Tuesday, 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You don't even get a weekend. You got to take 2 days off from work to vote, folks. Because if you are black, you need to prove that you want to vote just a little bit more. You need to show just a little bit more effort to vote in Kemps, Georgia. That's just the way it goes.
I like how they don't even try to hide it in that video.
It's stunning.
Representation in film is important, though, Sam.
Yes, at least African Americans will get an opportunity to model themselves after that person who's been disenfranchised. And that's the way they can respond to their disenfranchisement, with a smile. And this is no problem. Really just stunning. So if you are in Georgia. There's some more to this. Oh, is there more? Let's play.
People are mad at me for saying punch cards. I meant paper and pencil. Regardless, we vote analog style.
Yeah, more analog the better.
If you don't return, your ballot will be rejected and it will not count.
Oh.
Please note that all election-related forms and materials, including ballots, are available in English only. For more information,
that's
please
nice.
visit our website at sos.ga.gov/elections or call
Secretary of
us
State.
at 404-656-2871 if you have any questions.
Yeah.
This
What's
is a
wrong
public
with you
service
people?
designated-
How about that? That's
Wow.
my question. Unbelievable.
It's a new era.
This is what also, again, Nancy Pelosi has a tenure, and there needs to be new leadership in the House. For the life of me, I don't know who that person would be, though, if we wanted a leader who's going to push that to the left. People have suggested Barbara Lee in the past, and she has not signaled any interest in that position. But maybe if there's enough of an outcry, I don't know. But one of the things that the Democrats should have on the list for those hearings is voter suppression, to set up an opportunity when Democrats control the Senate and control the presidency to make the right to vote a federally legislated, canonized right. Because this is why and they need to fix the Voting Rights Act to override essentially the Supreme Court veto of the previously reauthorized Voting Rights Act, which had, I think it was 14 states that were subject to pre-clearance by the Department of Justice, so that if you make any changes to your voting, the Department of Justice needs to okay it because you have a record of disenfranchising minority voters.
What do you think the over-under is on Democrats ever doing something like that?
I would say the reestablishment of the Voting Rights Act, I would bet a lot they would do that. I would bet a lot that they would do that.
I would love to be wrong about this. I'm much more cynical about the Democratic Party. I just want to put this idea out here. I don't know if it's necessarily 100% true, but the Democrats' relationship with the Republicans is kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like Cuomo's relationship with the IDC, right? Because as long as they have Republicans to block the progressive things they're trying to do, then they don't actually have to do that much and go against the wishes of their donors.
Except for the 50 years in which they did pass the Voting Rights Act and reauthorize it time and time again. It was a Republican-controlled Supreme Court that gutted it. They have the votes the Democrats all have the votes to reinstate that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, but the Republicans stop it. So
it's also a different kind of party than it used to be.
Right. It's more sensitive, I think, right now in terms of that, without a doubt. I mean, I think like there may be some issues when you start getting into things like banks and Wall Street, but in voting rights, I think you're on very thin ice in terms of trying to suggest that Democrats don't want to pass it. In New York, with Andrew Cuomo and the corruption that is in New York State politics, I think there is an attempt to disenfranchise certain segments of the population. Certainly, there's a district in Queens and I think one in the Bronx, which were subject to that pre-clearance by the DOJ because you had local candidates. But in terms of like the House and the Congress, I'd be willing to bet you all of it.
Well, I hope that you're right.
Every single dollar.
But I don't think so.
Your bike, I'll bet you your bike.
It's not actually mine. It belongs to my friend.
I'll bet you your friend's bike.
Oh, geez, she's going to be so mad.
She's going to be
only
super
not
mad.
because I'm going to win. Sad.
All right, so here is Eric Trump on Fox and Friends. And look, Eric Trump is not that bright. And he's also, to be fair, he is been raised by a pathological liar who's a bad person. But nevertheless, Eric could do what, I can't even remember what Tiffany did, right? And she could, wasn't it Tiffany? What was her name?
What about her? The songwriter, Tiffany
No.
Trump?
Who's the Trump that we don't see?
It's Tiffany.
That's because she was birthed by
Right.
Martin.
Well, I'm saying, but Tiffany has been able to shuttle off to the sidelines.
Yeah.
We never talk about her anymore. This dude could do the same thing. But instead, he goes on Fox and Friends and makes a total ass of himself. Look, when you're on Fox and Friends and you're sitting there with Steve Ducey and Ainsley Adams and Brian Kilmeade, and you're the dumb one, you've got a real problem.
About why he's asking cabinet to enforce all of the departments to cut their budgets 5%. Listen to this.
I'm going to ask each of you to come back with a 5% budget cut from your various departments, whether it's a secretary, an administrator, whatever. I'm going to ask everyone.
Now, why is Donald Trump asking his department heads to cut their departments by 5%? First off, this is a drop in the bucket. It's not going to impact the deficit in any real way. Plus, it's also for show. They're not going to actually do this. They have made significant cuts to across the board from different departments since coming into office. Significant cuts in services, housing services, services for people living in poverty, environmental protection services. Why is the deficit growing so much? Let's keep listening.
An administrator, whatever. I'm going to ask everybody to come back with a 5% cut for our next meeting. I think you'll all be able to do it.
And that's in response to the deficit being $700+ billion. It's the highest since 2012.
You know who that is? That's a business guy, all right? I want 5%. And you know what? Next year I want another 3%. And there's a lot of fat. There's a lot of fat. You see that, right? When he renegotiated the F-35 program, he saved billions of dollars. When he renegotiated...
Pause it. It's funny he says the F-35 program because they raised the defense spending by about $70 billion. But go ahead.
Air Force One, he saved billions of dollars. I mean, that's the real estate developer. That's the guy who got elected, where you will call up every contractor. Hey, I do in my own business, in our business, in the Trump organization. You call up every contractor and you get the best possible price. You beat down the price. And that's why you have something like that. I mean, how many other politicians would have done that?
We haven't.
None. And by the way, and that's why you have a 20 trillion deficit. I mean, the deficit over.
Okay, pause it for 1 second. This is the business guy's son. The deficit is not $20 trillion. The deficit for 2018 is $779 billion. Now, he may be close to right in saying trillion, because by 2019, the deficit, now understand, this is the annual budget not being able to reach revenues not matching expenditures, is projected to be about $1 trillion. I am looking right here at a, where is this piece? I had it right here. It was a story back in 2013, I think it was. Where the heck is this thing? I can't find it. But they were projecting the deficit to not hit $1 trillion. It's going to hit $1 trillion until 2023. 2023. We're going to talk about why this deficit is increasing. Now, I don't care that much about the deficit. I got to be honest with you. I'm more concerned about why, where we're spending the money. But these guys think the deficit is super important, and they don't know how to predict what's going to happen. They don't seem to know how to do math. So it's not a $20 trillion deficit. Now we have debt, right? Our debt is nearly $20 trillion. But people understand what the difference between debt and deficit is. Deficit is the yearly operating differential. You're spending on an annual basis more than you're taking in. Debt is the accumulation of that deficit over time. But let's listen to the businessman talk.
And that's why you have a $20 trillion deficit. I mean, the deficit over doubled under Obama.
We can understand that.
$8 trillion to $20 trillion.
Pause it. Now, first off, I can't even begin to start to express this. When Obama came into office, the deficit in 2009 was about $1.4 trillion because there had been a financial crisis. That's in 2009. Okay? So if we're going to attribute that huge jump in the deficit from 2008, when it was about $500 billion, and it almost tripled over the course of a year, and that is because revenues plunged because we had a financial crisis. Millions of people lose their jobs. They're not paying taxes. The deficit basically hovered around there. It went down a little bit to 12 trillion in the next year. 12 billion. Again, 1.2 trillion, 1.2 trillion, and then down to about 1.1 trillion. And then by 2013, it was at 600 billion. By 2014, it's at about 400 billion. 400 billion in 2015. 2016, it jumps up a little bit to 500 billion again. But if we're going to go by the businessman's numbers, even though they're wrong in terms of when crediting the deficit to Barack Obama, the deficit went in the final year of Barack Obama's at 2015 was at $439 billion. And it's going to be at 4 short years later, it's going to be more than double. So he's lying and he's dumb. So that is the son of a businessman. Is there any more to that? That's it, right?
It's funny how he started trying to talk about his own business, and then he had to admit that it's the Trump organization.
It's the Trump organization. Look, we screw over contractors all the time. And listen, incidentally, when you say to the Secretary of Housing, cut your budget by 5%, there's no other bids you can take, incidentally, to deliver the same product, right? Like, that's the thing. It's like they're not going to deliver the same product. They're going to cut subsidies for people in housing. Less people are going to have housing, and it's going to create problems in our society, like homelessness.
They're going to build the public housing, and I'm going to say, you didn't do a good job. I'm only giving you half. Take it or leave it.
Right.
I thought all the revenue they were going to raise from business and, lowering the corporate tax rate was supposed to take care of this whole deficit.
That's a good question, Brendan. We were told, under the Laffer principle, that when you cut taxes for corporations and individuals, and really, is there a difference? At the end of the day, no. When you cut taxes for corporations, what you're doing, they told us, was to create new jobs and create new research and development. But all these corporations all did. And they told the administration they were going to do it. When Gary Cohn looked out at the audience and said, how many of the CEOs here are going to invest their tax savings in research and development? And no one raised their hands. They knew. Oh, you're just going to take it in stock dividends because you guys, as the CEOs, are one of the major stockholders and that's how you get your compensation? But the magic of tax cuts, according to Arthur Laffer et al., that was supposedly going to save Kansas and instead destroyed Kansas, was that as you cut taxes, you are creating so much new growth, that it will generate so much more economic activity that revenues will actually go up. So you cut taxes, but the amount of people who will be paying taxes and on so many different transactions and whatnot, it's actually going to increase revenue. In fact, here's Larry Kudlow, the chief economic advisor of the Trump administration, telling us that. When did he tell us that?
End of June this year.
End of June this year. Watch what happened.
Couldn't be done, they say. It's being done. It's probably coming on faster. And it's throwing off enormous amount of new tax revenues. As the economy gears up, more people working, better jobs and careers, those revenues come rolling in, and the deficit, which was one of the other criticisms, is coming down, and it's coming down rapidly. Growth solves a lot of problems. You've heard me say this for a very long time.
He said it since the the Reagan administration. The growth in revenue was this year was the 8th lowest in the past 50 years. And I'll remind you, we are 10 years out from a financial crisis. So a lot of those 8 years happened very close to the financial crisis that we went through.
God, Republicans can't even do capitalism right.
Their brand of capitalism does exactly what it's supposed to do.
Fair.
And so he was wrong by the deficit by a factor of, I don't even know how to do the math on that. If you say it's going down and it doubles,
yeah.
How do you do the math on that?
I think we know none of us is qualified to do that.
So we have the lowest growth in tax revenues in 50 years. In 50 years. And the full brunt of the tax cuts hasn't even hit yet. It hasn't even hit yet. And the deficit has doubled by their own metrics, not metrics that I necessarily even care about. They don't know what they're talking about as recently as 2 months ago. And we should say there's no reason to believe that the acceleration or the deacceleration in the growth of tax revenues and the acceleration in the rate of the deficit is going to be anywhere where they predicted, because they were so off on where we would be this short a time out that their ability to predict where we'll be even in a year is completely suspect. It's stunning how bad they are, even at their own crappy stuff. And here's the bottom line. They are using the deficit now. So we started off with Donald Trump earlier saying cut 5% from all of your discretionary spending. And Mitch McConnell is already preparing to lose the House by saying we need to cut Social Security and Medicare. This is the game that they play. We knew this. They juice the deficit. Then they make it like the deficit is a national crisis. then they say the only way to solve this is on the backs of people who depend on Social Security and Medicare to not live in complete destitution in their old age, which is about 2/3 of Americans. That's the way this game is played. Rinse, repeat. Rinse and repeat. Here we go. This is also a funny story. And it's, this ties in what we were talking about with Jeff Hauser today about the investigations that need to take place if Democrats take the House. We know that the Saudis provided billions of dollars to real estate ventures to the Trump organization. Saudi Arabia announced last week a $20 billion investment in an infrastructure fund managed by Blackstone Group, which, of course, whose head has a very close relationship with the Trump organization.
And has lent $400 million to the Kushner business as well.
And has deep ties to Kushner.
Good investment.
But here is that same dim-witted Eric Trump on Fox and Friends. And I only say he's dim-witted because he's dim-witted. Because it's so obvious that it would reflect poorly on me if I didn't point it out before we play this tip. Here's Trump saying, now he thinks he's being clever, and maybe for the Fox and Friends audience he is. But investment in Russia, investment in Saudi Arabia is not the same as getting money from those places and them investing in you. Right? In fact, if I invest in those countries, I have some leverage. Right? Because they need my investment. That's why if I was to take $20 million from George Soros or the Koch brothers, you as an audience member should say, hey, wait a second, they've got a little bit of control over him. Versus if I was lending George Soros $20 million, George Soros may have to answer to me.
That would be the day.
But Eric tries to pull some jujitsu here by saying, we have not invested in them. Listen.
Every time there's an international incident, they say, well, the president's too nice to Vladimir Putin. That's because he has so many investments in Russia. He says he's too open to letting this investigation play out. That's because he has investments in Saudi Arabia. You're running the Trump organization. What's the reality?
There's zero investments in Russia. There's zero investments in Saudi. We have absolutely nothing to do with those countries. And by the way, my father's been tougher on Russia than probably any human being in the world. That's what happens when you give offensive weapons to Ukraine, right? Obama never did that. That's what happens when you promote American energy. You take away their largest financial, stream, which is oil. I mean, that's what built oil and gas is what built Russia. And all of a sudden we're saying, hey, you know what? Why don't you buy American oil? We've got a lot of great oil workers. We've got a lot of great energy in the U.S. How about this? We'll supply you all the energy you could ever possibly need. Don't buy it from Russia.
Yeah.
Very impressive for Putin. Oh, you have good oil workers.
Yeah, good oil workers. Yeah. I would love to hear him answer the question, how much are you in hock to them? Not how much are they in hock to you. How much are you in hock to them? But I'm really surprised the Fox and Friends guys didn't hit him on that.
It looked like Ducey might have done that. He had a moment there, but
sometimes that's just like that. You never know with like Ducey. It could be just the producer whispering in his ear, "There's cookies in the green room." What?
Yeah, that had the sort of feel that he was prepared for that because he really hit the ground running. No, we don't have any investments.
And Kilmeade's question was like two-pronged, which is rare as well. I feel
yeah, like. He doesn't do that extemporaneously.
So this weekend I am debating Charlie Kirk from Turning Points USA.
Fwah, fwah.
Turning Points USA, as you know, is an organization that is funded by some right-wing billionaires. And what Charlie Kirk does for, I think, what should be a substantial amount of money, although maybe that makes it better than doing it for not a substantial amount of money, is he goes around and spreads fake memes about people. And apparently, and look, I'm not responsible for what Matt tweets out. I'm not responsible for what Jamie tweets out. I'm not responsible for what Brendan tweets out. But if any of you guys tweet out racist stuff, I'm putting you on notice, and I find out about it. I'm not going to check it every day, but if someone emails me and says, these guys are putting out racist stuff, I'm going to let you go. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make that commitment right now.
Then I'm going to get red-pilled.
And so Charlie Kirk has this problem where there are members of his organization, people that ostensibly receive funding, right? I mean, they must receive funding from the national organization. Turning Points, Florida, were caught. Somebody leaked their internal, I don't know, it was a Slack or chat thing or something.
WhatsApp, I believe.
Their WhatsApp channel, where they were sharing all sorts of racist memes using white supremacist symbolism, et cetera, saying stuff like, talking about groping Latinas and all sorts of and they also say just avoid, when you're on this, just remember, just avoid saying the N-word. Don't reference Richard Spencer too much.
Some is okay.
Yeah, and don't Jew hate just 'cause all the time.
Good advice.
So you have the option of Jew hating for a reason all the time, or Jew hating just 'cause some of the time. So you got a lot of latitude there for your Jew hate. That's nice.
They are liberty lovers.
Yeah, they don't want to be too policey about speech, just a little bit. And so apparently a student in Florida, is this at the Florida University? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Florida International University.
Yeah, this is Andy from the Young DSA.
Andy from who is the chair of the Florida International University. He's on campus and he sees that the Turning Points, I should say, USA president is sitting at a table, I guess, handing out literature. And Andy goes and says, hey, what's the deal with this? And, of course, look, the important thing is dialogue. And these guys aren't afraid of it. They have nothing to hide, I'm sure this guy will express regret and explain what happened. Here it is.
Sorry, no comment. No comment? Why not? Why don't you have anything to say? You specifically were making comments about raping Latino women. There were people making anti-Semitic comments. We have no comment. Okay, if you don't give me a comment, I won't go away. And I'm pretty sure that everybody who watches this video knows exactly what I'm doing. In that case, I'm going to call security. Well, if you call me, I'm more than certain. I'm not violating any campus policy. So, watch TV, no comment, huh? You don't know about this?
Well, there he goes. The guy gets up and runs away. And now look, it is, I just want to say, high school is a little more awkward of a time, but there's also some awkwardness in college. And if I was the president of an organization where people were being outwardly racist, I'm sure I would feel uncomfortable talking about it too. But it's important at times. Like, what is this guy afraid that he's going to say that's going to get him in trouble at this point? Yeah. Right? Like, that's my question. It's like, oh, I don't want to go too far out there and apologize too much. Because if I do, then what? I may get voted out of office at the attorney. I mean, why can't he just say, you know what? Those people have been removed from our organization. Yeah. Or maybe they haven't. Or why can't he just say, like, yeah, we don't condone this? Because maybe they do. Why? No comment. Honestly, like, this was national news. Did they not know they were going to have to address this? Or they just think, like, whatever, man, we said not just 'cause all the time. We put restrictions on the Jew hate.
What do you think about that? Do you even care?
To be fair, they have been helping people with their student government elections, reportedly. So
that's right.
Maybe he needs to hold on to that power.
Yep, that's true. He's got big funding behind him. He's got donors. I ran for student government. I never had that pressure, the donors pressure. I did all my signs by myself. Just wrote big block letters, Seder. And I had the advantage. It was during Passover, so I got more attention for those signs.
Oh, people thought maybe there was a Seder.
I just want to point out to Andy's tactics there, because he goes up there and says, I want you to address this. And when they say we don't have any comment, he's like, well, I'm not going anywhere. I don't have to leave this. And the kid says, well, I'll call security, like white people have learned to do. And then he just walks off. Just really well played. If you are on a college campus with Turning Points USA and you want to do this, tweet me the video, because I'd be interested in that.
There you go.
Nice. It is also remarkable the degree to which all of these Turning Point USA people just look like giant babies. Have you noticed this?
The other thing is, I feel bad for the kid who was left at the booth, because you couldn't really hear it very well, but he says, can you leave me out of this? I don't know what you're talking about. And the kid says, you didn't hear about this?
Yeah, that guy may be also like, I'm supposed to stay with the pamphlets, but maybe
I'm going to go play Fortnite.
Right.
Did you see the HR email? Are you getting to that?
The HR email?
Like they offered to service to give a free social media check to anyone who's concerned that they might have tweeted something racist.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Who's this?
The HR at grassroots organization Turning Points USA.
Yeah. They do a free
Human resources
scrub, right?
at Turning Points is doing like we can check and see if you've done racist stuff on your
Let's
social
see,
media.
Control Find N.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we should probably offer something like that too.
I'm pretty confident.
Oh, I'm going to need that
wasteful
HR.
spending
I'm going to
for
need
us.
that HR letter for this weekend, maybe. Just
After the Cernovich thing, I must admit, I went back through all my old tweets, and I've been on Twitter for like 10 years, and there's really nothing there. Spoiler alert, I was really emo when I was in my mid-20s. I cared a lot about vegan food, music, boys, and cats. So that is embarrassing, but it's not like a fireable offense.
as long as we're doing confessions, I think I probably got a little bit too excited about the Red Sox at times and maybe the Patriots. I mean, some of the Patriots stuff, I'm a little bit because of the election. And
That
stuff
is
like
fraught.
That's a little fraught. Folks, I don't want to spend too much time on Charlie Kirk. But there seems to be a trend amongst conservatives.
A brain worm.
It is weird. Now, I think people are probably aware that Kanye, who is a singer, right? Would you call him like a
hip hop or
R&B artist?
Hip hop
producer,
impresario.
rapper.
Right, rapper. And Kanye, of course, apparently, according to him, was diagnosed as having some emotional difficulties and decided to stop taking his medication. And then somehow he ended up in the Oval Office and talking about some stuff that's not terribly coherent. That's fine. But here is a Republican guy. What's it, Benny Johnson?
Benny Johnson of the Daily Caller.
He's at the Daily Caller, and he is defending Kanye because, look, when you're a conservative, it's very rare that anyone who's in a creative endeavor is in any way supportive of your stuff. I mean, it happens. There's James Woods and Chuck Woolery. Now, I know you're thinking, like, wait a second, where's the creativity? But he had a certain flourish when he would do some of the hosting of that game show. And here's Benny Johnson talking about Kanye, a black man, born impoverished, and into a broken home, works his way into a multi-millionaire global pop star, fashion guru, and a cultural icon. He dares to think differently politically, meets the president, libs. He's mentally ill, token Negro, can't read, traitor, attack his dead mother. And it's weird because if you are, well, he's not the only one who did that. Now, Benny Johnson did that, what, like 3 days ago?
A week ago.
A week ago. He got a little backlash, but I'm not going to tell you what that backlash was. Here is Charlie Kirk with a strikingly similar tweet, which
From
is
yesterday.
Odd. From yesterday. Think about it. A black man born in poverty.
I'm thinking about it.
In a broken home. Worked himself to be a billionaire and to world fame, a fashion guru, pop icon, Grammy winner. Spends hours with the president, dares to think differently, and is then attacked for being an unstable token Negro. Now, I'll tell you what's fascinating about this to me. What is the similarity in these tweets? Like, there's a lot of language that's very similar. It's almost as if they get the same talking points. What's also fascinating is that you would think one of two things. One, if you were disseminating talking points, you would do the slightest bit of research about Kanye. Or two, that you wouldn't plagiarize. But it turns out that Kanye West grew up in a middle-class suburban home, and his mom is like, what, a doctor or something? Is it?
Professor.
A professor. Has a PhD, let's put it that way.
R.I.P. She's dead now.
And she's passed away. But there's this weird assumption. There's either, let's put it this way. They either share talking points and don't update them even a week later, or they just have this weird assumption about black people that they grow up impoverished. So there it is. Well, I guess we got to wait another week and to see which other conservative star will
we'll have
put
to
this
start
out
a
there.
pool on that.
You know, there's been a lot of documented weird plagiarism, like Melania just ripping off sort of formal speeches by Michelle Obama and stuff.
Yep.
It's a really weird practice that the right does. I mean, plagiarism is obviously not just a right-wing thing, but I feel like there's something, I don't know, that makes me think a little bit like sociopaths about
Well, it's the same thing as when they brazenly lie and everybody knows it, right?
I
think they don't care.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. There's no accountability on the right for that stuff. Efficacy is really the only thing that matters. Plagiarism is irrelevant. That is just that you're imposing your sort of like normal brain upon, and that's not the case. One of the things that has gotten the Republicans very concerned is that Democrats are running on providing some type of material benefit to voters, that being Medicare for all. Now, they are desperate to try and figure out a way to make Medicare for all seem like a bad thing. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult for them because 1/4 of Americans, give or take, maybe a little bit more, are already on Medicare. And they like it. They like it a lot. And the idea of, in Bernie's Medicare for All plan, for instance, others, it varies a little bit, paying nothing for health insurance, and at the very least, not having to deal with all the forms and haggle every time you go to the doctor and have it being basically like an accounting course, is highly preferable to the system that we have now. And so they're trying to figure out how they can sell that Medicare for all is bad. And the only way they can do it is to say that Medicare for all is in fact not Medicare for all.
President Trump has been committed to making healthcare more affordable and bring more choice, more transparent, keep the patient in the driver's seat. People who are promising Medicare for all. That's one of the big ideas now people keep talking about. Medicare for all is Medicare for none. These are the same people who brought you Obamacare, but this time they're not even making the promise that you can keep your health plan.
Pause
or you
it.
can keep
Medicare. First of all, Obamacare is at its height of popularity. And which is not to say that I think a broad base of people don't realize that it needs to be improved, but understand what Medicare, what Obamacare is. There are less than 10% of the public who buys insurance through the Obamacare exchange. Far less than 10% of the public. The number of people who are getting health insurance through expanded Medicaid is probably around the same in terms of sheer numbers of people. The only thing that impacts people broadly from Obamacare are the patient protections. Remember, it was the ACA PPI bill. The patient protections, like you can't be denied because of pre-existing conditions. You can't be subject to rescission. You get a certain number of basic amenities to qualify insurance as actually being insurance. You're allowed to stay on your parents' plan until you're age 26. These patient protections are under threat by a Republican lawsuit. 20 states have joined the state of Texas. 19 states have joined the state of Texas. And Trump's own DOJ is not defending this case. So it's a little bit difficult to win. They will have those all taken away from you. So Obamacare is at its height of popularity, yet Democrats know that it's not enough and are going out and offering Medicare for all. So who brought it to you is irrelevant, but it's being brought by a slightly different group of people, some of whom have signed on. Others, but continue.
Keep your doctor, because they know that's not the case. The 178 million of us who've got employer insurance, that would go away under some of these proposals. Your doctor, you wouldn't get to keep your doctor because your doctor would flee these Medicare lower rates and we'd have a two-tier system of health care.
Pause it. I want you to contemplate this now. 178 people move on to Medicare. 178 million. Plus the, 40 million that are on Medicare now, maybe 45. So the vast majority of the country is on Medicare. These doctors are going to flee providing service to the 90% of people in this country who will be on Medicare, right? 10% maybe they'll be eligible for Medicare. They'll get Medicare, but they're also going to get private supplementary insurance. Maybe 10%, right? The super wealthy. Maybe the top 5%. So I don't know where, all these doctors are going to move to one neighborhood, Chevy Chase, Maryland, and they're all going to serve. Every one of these wealthy people are going to have their own personal doctor. The doctor's only going to work for them.
Bringing back house calls.
Exactly. House calls. You don't even have to have calls. They're just going to live in the driveway and service each individual person. That is the only way your doctor will not be available. The only possible way. It doesn't make any sense. It's not possible. What he's saying to happen is not possible to happen. Certainly there's going to be supplemental insurance. Certainly there's going to be private insurance that may pay doctors a premium over their Medicare, but there's simply not going to be enough of those customers for doctors to say, I'm going to leave the Medicare system. That's the whole point of Medicare for all. That's why it will control costs. That's why it will be cheaper for the country. That's why you have Medicare for all.
Lower rates, and we'd have a two-tier system of health care where they move into a cash system outside of this Medicare. So America's seniors would lose their doctors. They could lose their hospitals.
Pause it. Why would American seniors who are getting their doctors through Medicare now lose their doctors under a system of Medicare? When 3/4 of the country already is in a private system, why would they lose their doctors? It doesn't make any sense. Is there any more? Is that it?
That's it.
Yeah, he's grasping there.
Oh, yeah.
The thing people don't like about Obamacare is the part where they still have to pay for health insurance.
Exactly.
I mean, that goes without saying.
The patient protection part actually delivered. It was the affordable care part that didn't.
The most popular healthcare program in the country right now is probably Medicare and Medicaid. I believe it has
VA is probably the most popular, and then I would say Medicare.
And 75% of Americans approve of Medicaid expansion. So they see the writing on the wall, and they're going to their base, which is going to be they're going back to senior citizens on Medicare who are saying, "Hey, the death boards are coming back."
This has been relatively successful for them in the past, so I'm not surprised they're doing it.
And he talks about choice in insurance plans, like that's a good thing. Like, do you know anyone who enjoys trying to choose from the many confusing options?
Absolutely.
I want to choose the one that I don't have to pay anything for.
That's right. All right, we'll turn on IMs just for a second because I don't have much time here. Let's go to the phones. A lot of people have been waiting for a long time. Calling from a 154 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 154. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Yeah, you're on.
Okay. This is Derek calling from Eugene, Oregon. You got the area code wrong, bud.
No, I'm sorry. 541. 541. Apologize.
There we go. Represent.
Derek and
Eugene. That's right. I actually had a question that your guest today sort of went into, which was really cool because I've been thinking about this for a little while. I was wondering what sort of prescriptions you guys have thought about as far as like long-term inoculation, as far as preventing the type of like institutional destruction that we see coming from the right, like this insatiable appetite to sort of break down and destroy. There's sort of like a motivation gap, right? And assuming like if we stipulate the left gets power and sort of implements the types of things that we want for social mobility and social care, how do we keep those things from being destroyed long term?
Well, I think I think that we have examples of that, right? I mean, what are the most durable programs that we have had in this country? Social Security is basically it, and then Medicare and Medicaid to some extent. So the idea is universal. You make programs universal. If you are worried about people, wealthy people being able to get Social Security, there is a solution for that. You don't means test. You simply tax them either on the front end or the back end more. If you are worried about Donald Trump's kids having access to the free option in every state for higher education, I think you're misguided. It would be extremely healthy for society to have the wealthiest people going to school with, people from lower incomes. That would be a very healthy thing for society. But who cares? Tax them more if you're concerned about them getting a free ride at the university. You can tax them. You do it that way. Making programs universal is the most proven methodology for their durability in terms of providing social services. In terms of regulatory structures, the key is to pass to use an axe instead of a scalpel. So when we mentioned the Occupy working group in terms of financial reform at one point during the show, they wanted to pass a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act. And I think Warren brought, carried the torch on this, and Bernie to some extent as well. By doing a large statutory fix for the financial markets, basically sequestering commercial and investment banks, you don't have to worry about creating a regulatory structure that involves, thresholds and involves minutia that can then get overturned in small votes like we saw Dodd-Frank attacked, or in court cases, in narrow court cases, or threats of court cases by industry. You do a broad you take an axe as opposed to a scalpel. I'm not saying you lop off things. I'm saying that you do big structural changes statutorily rather than look at, sort of smaller regulatory things. And I think you also, when you get into office, you do reforms that are going to enhance the power of your base. So card check should have been done 8 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever it was, when they had control of everything. Voting needs to be made a federal right. These are things that are going to enhance your power. So that's it.
I have some longer term ideas.
And then and Jamie would say, of course, get rid of capitalism and snuff out all the capitalists. And would you, Jamie, would probably just get rid of federal government. You would also get rid of too, I think.
Well, yes. I mean, we need a short, medium, and long term strategy, right? Like, I agree with everything you're saying in the short term, but there really is no way to ensure that capital doesn't come back. And we saw this throughout the 20th century, you know? Like, it's not a coincidence that the greatest concessions that labor got from capital happened after the building of a militant labor movement full of communists and anarchists in the 20s and 30s. And we got the New Deal, which lasted a nice long time. It was great for a lot of people. It wasn't enough. Economic conditions are always going to change, especially now as capitalism develops in wildly unstable ways. There was a crisis in the 70s. Capital took advantage of that. They've been consolidating power ever since. So if we get to a point where we have the class power to make those reforms that Sam is talking about, I think it would be a mistake not to take it all the way and just execute the system so that it can't get up again.
I would say I don't think that we ever reach a point where private accumulations of power don't threaten the system, and whether that's
I would agree
through whether that's through capital or whatever. I just don't think this sort of struggle is ever going to reach an end.
I was just Derek. I was just giving the short-term life of Sam Seder one, but I will also say that mine is my horizon is, I think, significantly less than everyone in this office. So there's that. But yes, I agree with Matt. I think there's always going to be countervailing forces. I don't know that you can get rid of it, and I don't know that they will call themselves capitalists or what they will, but there will always be these countervailing forces.
You don't think we can get rid of capitalism?
I mean, something will fill the vacuum that is driven by some portion of humanity's will to power and greed. That's the way I feel.
Yeah, well, that's why we have to set up a democratic system that is both decentralized enough to avoid being taken over by a tyrant in the center, yet strong enough to avoid being taken over by tyrants. It's not easy.
No, I don't think it's easy.
It's a balance.
Sean, news is too bad. I can't come up with one single funny thing to say about it today. Vispa, can I get a chauffeur for my two friends in the YouTube chat, 10-Foot Man and Kennedy Crush? You know what? I think that we got a problem with our machine. Oh, no, we don't. They bring positive energy, overall great people. I'm grateful to chat with them daily. MR is like family to me, and I'm blessed to have all of you in my life. Also, either we need MR, the musical, and Sam CiderCon. Thoughts? Well, a shout out to JSA. He's always great insight. Thanks, Sam. Left is best. Marxist Maroda. Based on how Anna Kasparin has defined democratic socialism in the past, defining it as just being a social democracy, don't be surprised if your Should We Be Socialist panel ends up being more of a Should We Be Social Democrats panel. Contagious Chameleon. Well, I mean, that's the problem with not having a socialist on there. Contagious Chameleon. Sam, what are Republicans hoping to gain from the big money spent online? Is there a majority of the shrinking demographic of white millennial and Generation Z men that are susceptible to voting for fascists? I think things have changed, but Republicans think they can get away with the same results they got from putting in money in television. I don't think they will get those results. Their target demographic is smaller target now. What do you think? Is the left winning the ideological debate for the long term? I don't know.
Winning some of them and losing others,
right.
Maybe?
I don't know how to assess that. Need new sheets. I want to order some Brooklinen. Your sponsor page is completely empty. What's going on? I need new sheets. Google majority.fm Brooklinen, and it will take you to an episode where there is a code. But we got to get that stuff filled out. Men in the trench. When Chuck Schumer visits a prostitute, he gives them oral, pays them, and leaves. I didn't.
That's a thinker.
Wooden computers.
It's a cuck joke.
Hey, y'all. That's not a cuck joke.
In a sense, it is.
No, it isn't.
No,
Yes, it is.
no, it's not.
It's just-
He doesn't have any ownership over a woman that's being challenged. That's mainly the thing about cucks, right?
I think you guys are thinking too hard about this.
I also don't think that's like, it's also,
Yeah.
it's
a
I don't think
misfire,
it's
I
good.
think.
I think it's a misfire.
Some guys do pay to give prostitutes oral.
Yeah, of course.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Wooden computers. Hey, y'all, keep a lookout for email from Kelly Jones, Alex Jones' wife. I sent her a clip of the ex-InfoWars producer that called in the other day. She wanted to know his info, and I gave her Majority Report's email. We probably won't give out that information. JJ Cool, do you think Bernie should run his campaign to build a wall on the Canadian border to keep Peterson and McGavin's out? Or what is it? Gavin McGinnis.
McGillicuddy.
Retcon, how do we grapple with automation if we want to use our labor as leverage? Do you guys think we only have a small window of time for that to be possible? Technological advancement could give us a society where we can benefit and thrive, or live in a society where we have no power or privacy or anything really. First of all, I don't think we're going to be completely replaced by robots. I think that's a mistake.
That'll be a bad move by the capitalists, because then what would they have for us?
They would get taxed
Well, they
for
don't
not having workers.
They don't understand their own economic system. Like, if you believe in Marx's concept, like I do, I think a lot of folks do on the left, labor surplus value is only generated by human labor and resource extraction. It's not generated by stuff that you buy, equipment that you buy that starts depreciating as soon as you buy it. So that's not going to go well. But like I will say, automation is a real threat. I think people underestimate it sometimes, the threat that it poses to our ability to organize around labor. And it's going to pose challenges in the future, but it's by no means impossible. And I think we've seen some...
This is how I would organize if I wanted to organize labor in an era of machines. Machine technicians. Because a smaller amount of people can make a lot more things go wrong in that instance. So, I mean, there are unintended consequences and things that we haven't necessarily contemplated where power will come from. I am far less concerned about the ability of labor to figure out how to exercise power than I am labor's willingness to exercise that power. I mean, you don't need many technicians to shut down a factory if it's all machinery, right? Like, you don't need many. You don't need many to sabotage it. I mean, that's the thing, is that the power is going to come from other areas, and the leverage is going to shift in different ways. I think the idea is the big challenge is less about how will labor be able to exercise power, and the challenge still remains the willingness to exercise power.
But just to go a little further down that road, there are historical precedents for unemployed people organizing. Like the National Welfare Rights Organization was a movement in the 60s and 70s where mostly women of color who were on welfare actually organized very effectively. So
the March on Washington, you had people camping out in D.C. for weeks. Gabe from Chicago. Comrade Gritty loves you. Comrade Gritty loves you. Carl Sagan, 2020. What will Republicans do during the lame duck session? Oh, it's going to be a crap show, folks. It is going to be a crap show. As a moderator of socialism panel that doesn't include an actual socialist. Well, it's not a socialism panel. It is, should we be socialists? So
maybe they'll decide that they all should be at the end of it.
It's possible.
It's experimentation.
And we're going to have to go, now who do we talk to? Now that we've decided we should be socialists,
well,
who do we talk to?
Right?
Yeah.
Well, then you just go to the next farther one over.
I don't have the ability as moderator to insert anybody on the panel.
Then you move to the should we be Maoists panel. You find the one that you don't want to be, and then you just stop there.
Do you see? John from San Antonio is right about Bernie. You seem to be forgetting the power of his stadium-filling campaign rallies. No, I'm not. Many of those people couldn't even vote for Bernie in the primaries, but they're now registered involved in getting Bernie's platform implemented. You underestimate Bernie's campaign. If you forget how powerful those campaign rallies were, you're doing us a disservice. Bernie's platform brought in millions of people.
I think it's a disservice to put that all on Bernie Sanders and not the conditions that led to him and the issues. People were organizing around Medicare for all before Bernie Sanders announced to run.
Yes.
Exactly. People want the tail to wag the dog in these scenarios. Whether you're making an accelerationist argument, which is terrible, or a Bernie argument, which is less terrible. Like, it is the conditions, it's not Trump himself, but the conditions that gave rise to Trump that is inspiring so much activism on the left right now.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think also, though, I mean, I have, we've had this argument before. The economic insecurity, I mean, there's another report out today that shows you can control for these things to the extent that one can do any studies. I mean, I'm open to studies that say something the opposite. I just haven't seen any, and I'm not sure why.
Well, one of the conditions that gave rise to Trump is racism, right?
Well, that's right.
So I'm not only talking about economics, although it is a part.
Right. But the racism has been there for a long time. I mean, this is a study from 3 political scientists, UCLA, UC Riverside, and Princeton. And they looked specifically at Obama to Trump switchers. And white voters with racially conservative or anti-immigrant attitudes switch votes to Trump at a higher rate than those white voters with more liberal views on these issues. Conservative, anti-immigrant. We find little evidence that economic dislocation and marginality were significantly related to vote switching in 2016. It goes through what their methodology, but they found attitudes on race and immigration were crucial in distinguishing the characteristics of both Trump and Clinton switchers. The more racially conservative an Obama or third-party voter was, the more likely they were to switch to Trump. Similarly, the more racially liberal a Romney or third-party voter was, the more likely they were to switch to Clinton. Class was largely irrelevant in switching to Trump. Keeping racial attitudes constant, white working-class voters were not more likely to switch to Trump. The white working-class voters who did switch tended to score about as highly on measures of racial conservatism and anti-immigrant attitudes as wealthier switchers. Third, the correlations between measures of economic stress and vote switching were either weak or non-existent. There's little evidence supporting the economic anxiety or economic populism explanations for the Trump surge. I don't even know what that means in terms of surge. I mean, there were Obama voters who switched to Trump, but still only talking about 70,000 votes in 3 states. That made the difference.
Well, how are they defining class there?
How are they defining? I don't know.
You
don't
have to be poor to have economic anxiety, right?
Well, no. They measured they did economic measures of stress involved a person's family income was lower or higher than the median income in where the county where they lived and against where they had been. So you don't have to be poor to have economic anxiety, but economic anxiety must have some definition. And if it's not relative to where you were in the past, and if it's not relative to where other people are, I don't know what it would be.
Well, it's a fear of loss.
So that's more like the status thing, right? Like a status loss, which is tied to economics, as opposed to like an economic privation that's leading you to like entertain Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that wealthier people were more nervous about losing their money, and that's economic stress. But the socialists represent that same economic stress, right? There's a clear sense that they're going to lose their money from a socialist than they would Trump, and that's not.
They're going to lose it from socialists more than they're going to lose it from immigration.
Right. And so...
Well, it could be about the economy as a whole as well. Like his message of economic nationalism wasn't just about, oh, this is going to help my bottom line. It was some more nebulous idea about how America is doing in the world.
It could also be then just a coincidence that these people also happen to have more proclivities towards not liking minorities and immigrants. I mean, that's what you'd have to find. But you see, here's the thing that's sort of frustrating, is I understand the desire to have the narrative about those Obama to Trump voters be about the economic policies. I happen to subscribe to all the remedies of those policies, broadly speaking. But I don't think there's any data to support that. And you can keep, every time we have another one of these studies, we can keep saying, dancing around the economic stress. But the reality is, and if there's no way to measure economic stress, there's no way to make that argument.
Well, there's something comforting about that argument because it then puts the ball in our court, right? Then we can do something about that.
And the economy was measurably better in 2016 than it was in 2012. And so for those Trump Obama voters, so, there's just no data, and I'm open to it, to make that narrative. It is quite possible that you could appeal to those people if you're providing them something that is more important to them than their racism. Okay, that's possible. That I theoretically, at least. And
like the Georgia healthcare versus immigration thing Jeff brought up.
Yeah. And look, the idea of people saying like, well, that black guy is a little bit different than the normal black guys that I deal with or that are around here is, I certainly have run into racists like that in my life, without a doubt. So it's not that strange. And I would add the phenomena of, hey, man, we just had one non-normal president for 8 years. I'm not going to go with two, right? Where's the white guy?
It's not always that literal either, though. You're right. It's really hard to measure what I'm talking about because part of what I'm talking about is false consciousness. People don't always know why they do the things they do or why they believe the things they believe.
Right. And social scientists try and divine that by asking a series of questions that are not directly like, did you vote for this guy because you're a racist? They measure a whole quantum of attributes and responses and then compile the data. Show me the study that says something different than that, and I am open to it. But we can't win if we are telling ourselves stories that are not true.
And I don't mean to downplay the importance of racism in all of this, but I think it was only one factor. Did people magically get more racist from 2012 to 2016, or was it mediated by other things?
That's what I'm saying is that I think, yes, they probably did in these instances. I think it's quite possible for that to happen, or they can act upon racism more. Certainly we've seen an increase in hate groups, right? We've seen an indisputable increase in hate crimes. And so people are acting on their racism more. So if we have people going out and gay bashing, or we have people going out and beating up, or spray painting swastikas, did racism increase? Did anti-Semitism increase? Or do people feel there's an opportunity for them to express it? And
it's a season.
Right. So that explanation is not so strange, that there could have been an increase in racism after a black president and a racially polarized time with Black Lives Matter.
Demographics.
And that's very conceivable. Very conceivable.
I never want to downplay the impact of economic crises. And we're seeing it all over the world, too. We're seeing it in Europe, in countries that used to have social democracy.
Yes, their crises lasted a lot longer because it was more austerity there than there was here. We've been on an improving trajectory. That doesn't mean that the baseline's not problematic, but there has been an improving trajectory. That's just the reality. Let's go to this clip of David Bratt. We're late.
I was going to say.
All right, we're going to have to save this stuff for tomorrow. Folks, I'm sorry, we don't have time for another phone call. I don't know what happened to the time today.
We were getting close to a zero-sum territory.
Zero-sum territory. All right, we got 5 more IMs. Train Boy. There are exactly 7 people in the country who enjoy the selection process of getting health insurance on the exchanges, and all of them work for Vox.com. I think they've all written a story about it. Sam's Tinder profile. Hey, girl, swipe right. Why don't you come over and sit on my chest and read me Social Security reports during the 9th inning of all Red Sox playoff games? It'll stop me from having a heart attack. Man. We may have to pay for a writer for that one. Nick from Manitoba. The way the right talks about healthcare is like a horse and buggy salesman warning people these new automobiles have no horse poop traps. That's a good one. I'm going to use that. Black Marxist. I may use that in the debate this weekend. I hope that comes up. I wish you could debate Ben Shapiro on his Sunday special in L.A., though a dunce. He is by far the smartest conservative. Yeah, apparently they weren't interested in a debate for him. I don't know what. Negro spiritual, Danarchy worship. And the number one reason I am eagerly anticipating the midterm elections is DJ Danarchy's inevitable drops in the blue wave. Jordan Peterson's tapeworm. While I can speak to nutritional value of my host all meat diet, I can tell you that from a constipation and impacted colon are really helping my comrades and I to form a proper beachhead in his gut. Whoops, gotta go. Here comes some Canadian bacon. Bad idea, society. Goodness, turn on the IMs. The problem with the left is that many writing eulogy think pieces about Elizabeth Warren for taking a DNA test and overly interrogating her connection to Native American ancestry, while at the same time calling your show insisting that you be nicer to Jimmy Dore. Practice some level of political strategy, people. A penny for your thoughts. One positive form of ACA regulations rarely mentions how easy it is for providers to deal with insurance companies. I'm a behavioral health provider, and the companies have more employees serving providers and easier and quicker payment systems. Oh, that's good. Huh. Is that from, I didn't realize that was a function of ACA regulations. And the final IM of the day, I think it's been a long time since we've heard from Jez Gargelet. I love seeing the amazing behind-the-scenes video from last year's live event, and I appreciated the shout-out from you in it. It was really very well done and makes me proud to be a member of such a classy group of people with such refined intelligence and sense of humor. I don't know where this is going. When will you guys do another one, and will there be a documentary on it too? Love, yours truly, Jez Gargelet. Ah, that was very nice. See you tomorrow. Early!
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive